Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about writing number lines for compound inequalities, and vice versa, writing compound inequalities from number lines. So here's what we're going to do. A compound inequality looks like this. X is greater than 5. Actually, let me restart how I'm going to say this. It looks something like this. 5 is less than X, which is less than 9. This is a compound inequality. It's a little confusing to say aloud, and it's kind of hard to think about sometimes, but really what this creates is an interval of numbers that X could be, or whatever variable we're working with. Now usually when we work with inequalities, we just say X is greater than or less than that number. It creates like a set of infinite numbers it can be. It's like as long as it's bigger than 6, it's good. Compound inequalities say that, maybe X has to be bigger than this number, but it also has to be smaller than that number. It gives a range of values that it could be. So what I really want you to think about or hear whenever you see an inequality like this is that X must be between 5 and 9. That's probably the best way to think about it. X must be between these two numbers. Now sometimes you might see an or equal to sign on one of these, such as I just wrote, that would say X must be between 5 and 9, but it can be 5. You would read this saying 5 is less than or equal to X, which is less than 9. But I think that's just a lot more complicated way of thinking about it than looking at it as X is between those two. So let's make a number line for this compound inequality. Here's what I like to do. And again, depending on your teacher, they may have different requirements, but for my own students, what I want to see is at least 2 numbers on the number line to start with, and those are going to be the numbers that you see here on this in the inequality. So 5 and 9 have to be there, and then I want at least one number on either side of those. So maybe 10 and 4. Now sometimes you actually could go ahead and fill that in. I'm okay if you do that. In this case, there's only 3 numbers that go in there, so it's really not too much of an issue to do that. But if you had like 60 numbers between those two, maybe you wouldn't want to write all that stuff. And that's okay not to write the space in between them, in my own personal opinion at least. But now that we have our number line here, I'm going to put a circle at each of these numbers. So at 5 and at 9, we're going to get a circle. Now just like with regular inequalities, we are going to fill in these circles if it is an or equals to inequality. Well, we have one up here that's or equals to and one that isn't. So which one of these circles do you think we're going to fill in? Yeah, the one with the 5. I mean, that's the one that the inequality is right next to. So we're going to fill that in. If the inequality right next to the 9 had the or equal to, we would fill it in as well. And since X must be between these numbers, I'm actually going to draw my line for this inequality between those 2 dots. This says that X can be 5, and it can be any number all the way up to 9, but it can't be 9 itself because open circle. That's a compound inequality. That's all there really is to it. Let's do one more example like this. But let's actually do the number line first and then write the inequality from it. So let's say we have a number line, and I'm going to do a little larger gap this time. So let's do like -5, -4, and then we'll have some space, and then here's a 12 and a 13. Now I just include these numbers off to the side so that I can go to, I can say, that that's the direction it's going. It's getting larger, it's getting smaller, that kind of thing. Whenever we have a really large gap and we don't put those numbers in between, I like to do something like this, just a little squiggly line in there. That shows there's a little bit more gap than there actually would be. That's honestly not mandatory to do. It's just kind of what I like to do. It's something we do in graphs, and it kind of carries over a little bit. So I'm going to put an open circle here. I'm going to draw my line over to here, and I'm going to close this circle. So how would we write that compound inequality? Well, since it looks like this, it looks like what I call an interval. It connects one number to another, and we're going to start with the smaller one, -4. Now, we're going to decide, is it an open circle or a closed circle? That'll decide if we do less than or equal to. Since it is an open circle, we just do less than, and we're always going to have less than signs when we do these compound inequalities that are like intervals. Always going to be less than signs. And then we have x, because x is what we're talking about, that's our variable. And then we need another inequality sign. Again, is it going to be less than, or is it going to be less than or equal to? It's a filled in circle at the end of it, so that's what we're equal to, and then we have 12. So there's our compound inequality. It says -4 is less than x, which is less than 12. In other words, x must be between -4 and 12. That's all there is to it. There's one other type of compound inequality, and that's going to be when x has multiple values, but it's not an interval. It's something like this. X must be greater than 5, and x must be less than, or could be less than 2. A lot of times we get the word or between these, and that's a really important word here. Because these two statements contradict each other, right? X is greater than 5, and x is less than 2. Well, that's not possible. A number can't be greater than 5 and less than 2. But we have the really important distinction of the word or. That means x could be either of these things. It's kind of the opposite of an interval. This is saying that x is anything leading up to 2, x is anything bigger than 5, it just can't be in between 2 and 5. It's like the anti-interval, the interval that x couldn't be. Let's go ahead and see what this looks like on a graph, because I think this is a lot easier to think about and look at on a number line. So I'm going to draw my number line here. On problems like this, on these not intervals, x is this or this problems, what I personally ask of students is to, again, label the numbers that we see up here. Even though 5 is first and then 2 is second, we need to make sure our number line's written properly, so that 2 is going to come first and then the 5. And what I ask is that you have some sort of a number in between there, a number that's in between these, like 3 or something, whatever you want. Honestly, as long as I can tell you know what you're doing with the number lines, that's good enough for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plot these inequalities separately. X is greater than 5. Well, I know that means I'm going to put a circle on 5. Filled in? No, because it's not or equal to. And since x is greater than, I'm going to go in the direction of larger numbers than x. So there we go. There's one of these done. Our second interval says x is less than 2. So I'm going to go to 2, put an open circle, because not or equal to, and then it says less than, so I'm going to go send my arrow in the less than direction. And we've made our number line. What this tells me is x could be anything leading up to here, but then it stops, and we have this little segment of numbers, 2, 3, 4, and 5, that x cannot be. And then it starts up again and says, as long as we get after 5, x is good. X is fine. This is another type of compound inequality, like I said, with that interval that it can't be as opposed to the interval that it must be. Let's do an example of these from the point of view of just getting the number line and writing the inequality from it. So let's say we have our number line here. I'm going to do -3 and then 2, and I'm just going to put 0 between them here somewhere. I'm going to say we have a closed circle, arrow going this way. We have an open circle, arrow going this way. What we can do, if we see a number line like this with a compound inequality, if they're going in opposite directions, the arrows are going not towards each other, then we write these inequalities individually, and both of them are part of our answer. So I see this, and it says -3 or less, going downwards. So that means x must be less than, again, my inequality sign, kind of thinking about it like an arrow, is pointing in the same way as this arrow. X is less than -3. Now, did I write that correctly? Not quite, because filled in dot, filled in circle means or equal to. Now, my second inequality, I have a 2, and it's going greater than. So x must be greater than, again, my arrow, same as my inequality, 2. And we wrote that one correctly because open circle. The important thing is we write or. So x is less than or equal to -3, or x is greater than 2. These are all the different types of compound inequalities and how to write them on a number line or how to get them from a number line. If you have any specific questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. More than happy to help. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.